Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. As the budget session of Parliament gets underway, we ask, what is the state of the economy and what is the state of the nation's politics? Those are two issues I shall discuss today with India's former Home and Finance Minister P Chidambaram. Over the last 1 year, his columns have written extensively on these subjects, and now a collection of those columns has been put together as a book, and here it is. It's called Standing Guard, A Year in Opposition. The book is published tomorrow, but today Mr. Chidambaram is my guest. Mr. Chidambaram, because we are 4 days away from the budget, let's start with the economy. I'll come later on in part two to politics. There is, first of all, a raging debate whether India's way of measuring GDP today is credible and whether, in fact, it's reliable. Arvind Subramanian, the chief economic advisor, has questioned it. According to the papers, Raghuram Rajan has questioned it. The Wall Street Journal has attracted attention to it. And latest revisions put out by the CSO have simply underlined those doubts. But your former chief economic advisor, Kaushik Basu, now the chief economist of the World Bank, in an interview to me a week ago, strongly endorsed the government's way of calculating GDP. So where do you stand? Is it reliable or is it not?
It is reliable, but I think questions can be raised, and I'll tell you why. I am not criticizing the integrity of the Central Statistical Office. I have defended that office before. What is being doubted is the deflator. You take the nominal GDP growth, apply the deflator to arrive at the real GDP growth. They are assuming a deflator for the whole year of exactly 1, which is what gives an 8.6% nominal GDP growth into a 7.6% real GDP growth. I think Governor Reserve Bank and some others are questioning the deflator. In fact, the governor is on record saying perhaps the deflator is too low. If you use the normal deflator, which is I think about 2.5 or so, then the growth is not 7.6.
Nirmala Sitharaman, in an interview to me earlier this month, said that she acknowledges that many people consider the government's GDP figure suspect. She says there are many questions, some troubling, that have been asked about it, and she suggested a comprehensive review. Do you think that's a good idea, or would that unsettle people?
I don't think we need a comprehensive review, because I think the way of measuring GDP is after the Statistical Commission and a group headed by Dr. Rangarajan recommended it. They have increased the data points. They collect information from many, many more industries today. I think that's the correct way to go about it. I think what we need to examine is, are we using the right deflator? I don't blame them. See, WPI is negative for the last several months. CPI is inching up to 5.7. Do you use WPI? Do you use CPI? Do you use a mixture of the two? This is a judgment call. The CSO has taken a judgment call. Some others are questioning the correctness of that judgment.
But if a comprehensive review is not the best way of solving these doubts, and those doubts are pretty prominent, what then is the best way of doing it? Or will time alone settle them?
You see, the RBI uses its own deflator. And RBI, I think, is using a more appropriate deflator. So if the CSO puts out a figure at the end of the year, and the RBI puts out a figure, I would tend to lean in favor of the RBI figure.
So should the CSO use the RBI deflator?
Well, they have declined to, just as the RBI has declined to use the CSO's deflator. The difference won't be very large, but there will be a significant difference.
Which also suggests that this disconcerting difference will continue for a while, and people will continue to raise questions.
It will. See, an economy growing at 7.6%, someone told me, there must be a spring in the step. Where is the spring in the step?
You've come, in fact, to the next issue I wanted to raise with you, which is to look specifically at this year's growth figures. The government has just raised them from 7.2 to 7.6%. The World Bank puts it even higher at 7.8. But you know better than me that industrial production and capital goods declined precipitously in November, and they did so again in December. And when you look on the ground, corporate profits and corporate turnover, credit offtake, exports for 14 months running have fallen, and the general impression of industrialists is that this is not an economy growing at 7.6. What's your feeling as a former finance minister? Is 7.6 credible, exaggerated?
I think we are overstating growth. You see, if we are growing at 7.6, some parts of the economy must reflect that kind of growth. Let's just tick off the top 4 segments. Exports, negative for 14 months. credit growth, slowest in 20 years. Tax revenues, indirect taxes, net of the additional taxes imposed in the last 7 months, post-budget, it's growing at a very normal rate. Then you look at sales of firms. All firms' sales are down 6% in the first 9 months. Manufacturing companies, sales are down 11.5%. 3 tractor companies are reporting decline in tractor sales of between 12 to 23%. I can't see a single figure which says, here I am, I'm standing in support of 7.6%.
Direct taxes, they've gone up 40%. Would people be paying if they're not actually producing and earning money?
No, direct taxes, actually they'll fall short. Indirect taxes.
I beg your pardon, yes, indirect. Would that be happening?
Yeah, that is because of the additional taxes.
And entirely explained by that.
See, when the petrol prices fell, they have not passed on the entire fall to the consumer. They have mopped it up by additional taxation post last budget. Net of that is a real indirect tax growth.
So where would you say growth actually is? If it's not 7.6, is it 7? Is it even below 7?
2 economists whom I have great respect for and who have done this, and one of them has done this perhaps all his life, put it at between 6 and say 6.5% growth.
And you believe that's a more accurate figure?
I think that reflects more accurately what's happening on the ground.
A second concern is at the moment to do with the fiscal deficit. First, let's look at this year's fiscal deficit target before I come to the concerns about next year's. Even if one accepts the economy is growing at 7.6%, it's way below the budget target of 8.1 to 8.4.
Way below.
Secondly, nominal GDP is said to be something like as much as 4% below the budget target of 11.5. And economists say that if in these circumstances the finance minister is going to make this year's target of 3.9% fiscal deficit, he'd have to fairly seriously curb expenditure. Now, as someone who's been finance minister, do you think he should cut expenditure to make the target of 3.9, or should he allow the target to slip by a little?
For the current year?
For the current year.
For the current year, he'll easily meet the target. And I'll tell you why. Even if the absolute number is higher by about 20 to 30,000 crore, thanks to the lower nominal GDP growth, he got a bonanza of 1,40,000 crore from oil. It's 1,40,000 crore which is filling 3 big holes. The first big hole is the shortfall in tax revenue. Second big hole is a shortfall in disinvestment. And the third big hole is this increased fiscal deficit. So he's got 1,40,000 crore and he will fill the gap for the current year.
So commentary, and there's quite a bit of it, that he might possibly miss 3.9 this year is mistaken. You believe he has enough to be able to do it comfortably?
Oh, he'll meet 3.9 comfortably.
Let's then come to the debate, and it's a much bigger debate about meeting next year's fiscal deficit target of 3.5%. Arvind Subramaniam has gone on record to say in his midterm economic review that the government should relax it. The money is needed to put into investment in infrastructure. On the other hand, Raghuram Rajan, Arvind Panagriya, and this time even Kaushik Basu have strongly said the government must stick to 3.5, otherwise its credibility will be at stake. Where do you stand on that debate?
My position is very clear. There's no way in which the government should depart from the fiscal consolidation path. This fiscal consolidation path was laid down by our government after the Kelkar report, and in order to pull back from where we were, say in 2012, early 2012. Now, the pause in the current year was wrong. If they pause next year too, the government will be hopelessly wrong. I think the rating agencies forgave one lapse. They will not forgive another lapse. We have to get back to the fiscal consolidation path, which means for the next year, he has to announce, as against 3.9% for the current year, he must announce at least 3.5%.
The argument that's made for relaxing the target for next year is that if the government keeps its commitment to the 7th Pay Commission and OROP, it simply won't have the money to put into investment in infrastructure. And if you're not able to do that by relaxing the fiscal deficit target, then how should the government find that money? Are there other ways which would be more suitable than relaxing the fiscal deficit, which the government should look to instead?
We have implemented pay commission reports in the past. I implemented the last 3 pay commission reports. Everybody knew there was a pay commission coming once in 10 years, and this is the year of the pay commission. So those are no excuses at all. The way to fund or finance capital expenditure is to raise tax revenues, raise non-tax revenues, and tap into the savings of foreign countries, which is FDI. These are the 3 ways of funding your infrastructure. Apart from that, there is also the way to borrow. Now, borrowing and financing infrastructure or capital expenditure is not the right way. You cannot borrow and spend your way out of your problems. In fact, borrowing and spending is the cause of our problems. So what is the cause of our problems cannot become the cure for our problems.
In which case, would you, as a former finance minister, advocate a vigorous privatization policy, not just selling SUTI shares, but also strategic sales of profitable PSU, something this government intended to do this year, but didn't?
You see, what this government should do is to focus on direct tax collection. This is not the time to reduce direct taxes. Direct taxes are progressive taxes. Only those with the capacity to pay, only those who make profits pay the direct taxes. But I think they're very soft on direct taxes. Indirect taxes, I think there is scope by tightening administration. There is scope for enhancing indirect taxes. And if they pass the GST, they will get better indirect taxes. And then they should look at non-tax revenue. Disinvestment is one kind of non-tax revenue. Spectrum sale is one kind of non-tax revenue. They should focus. Why are they not selling the spectrum? They are already behind the schedule by about half a dozen, 6 months or so. They should spell spectrum. And if they are decided that some public sector concerns are simply not viable and they will get rid of them, they should get rid of them. I think they want to do many things, but they end up doing nothing.
Let me bring up a third concern that worries people today, and it's to do with India's exports. You mentioned a moment ago they've fallen for 14 months in a row. Now, with the yuan dipping, many are scared that, in fact, India's import bill will go up and you could have a double whammy. How seriously do you take the situation, and what would you be doing about it were you finance minister today?
You see, in the election campaign, they said when we come to office, the dollar will be at 40 rupees to the dollar. Mercifully, nobody speaks about that today. A gradual depreciation of the rupee is inevitable because our inflation is still high. And the fundamentals of the economy are not so strong as to shore up the value of the rupee. And I think we should allow it to be market determined. So the import bill will go up because of the depreciation. But then why is this government allowing unrestricted gold imports? Why is this government not focusing on investing in exploration and production of oil? It's gold and oil which are the 2 biggest items of import which create a hole in the current account deficit. This government is extremely soft on gold imports and is extremely lethargic on oil exploration and production.
And you are saying that that's where they should be focusing their attention if they're going to tackle the export problem.
The export problem seems to be beyond their control. In fact, the Commerce Minister has not spoken about the fact that for 14 months, unprecedented in India's history, this is merchandise exports. Even service exports is at about 0.5% or so.
So you're saying they're actually unconcerned about it, or at least if they're concerned, they're not doing anything adequate about it?
I think they're clueless. I think they're clueless.
You mean you really think they don't know what to do?
I think so, because all that they do is blame the global situation.
So they're floundering, in other words.
Well, that's an appropriate word.
What about something else? There is a lot of concern today about the state of India's public sector banks and the huge non-performing assets that they carry. Now, in an interview she gave me, Nirmala Sitharaman said that the government is considering an asset reconstruction company with equity contribution from both the government and the RBI so that they can acquire the non-performing assets of banks and allow them to restructure their balance sheets so that when private sector investment picks up, these banks are in a position to lend. Do you think that's a good way of tackling the problem, or is it a mistaken way because they're using taxpayers' money to bail out reckless banks, and that amounts to a moral hazard?
No, I think there are two issues here. Recapitalization of banks is regardless of the NPA. Even if there was no NPA problem, banks have to be periodically recapitalized because that is one industry where without additional capital you cannot grow your business. You can have a steel plant and with the same capital you can grow your business. But in banking, for every rupee that you lend, you require new capital. So I think recapitalization is inevitable. They should do it, either by rights issues or by pumping in more capital on behalf of the government, whatever. There are many ways. Then you can raise tier 2 capital. As far as NPAs are concerned, well, these NPAs have to be liquidated. One way to liquidate it is to create an asset reconstruction company. The questions that I want to ask is, which chairman, which board of any bank today will sell his NPA to an asset reconstruction company? He'll have to take a big hit and be assured that 5 years down the line, the CBI or the CVC will not come after him.
Why try the Prevention of Corruption Act is the problem that
this is
precisely
why bank chairmen are loath to sell their NPAs to another party or another recovery company.
Which means the government has to first settle Section 13 of the PCA before they can move on to settle NPAs.
The government has to then say the responsibility of transferring NPAs from the balance sheet of the bank to the ARC is the government's responsibility.
In other words, this is a statement the finance minister must make with full authority in Parliament.
If he wants to set up the ARC.
And in the absence of that statement, the ARC is pretty meaningless.
Because no chairman will sell unless he is forced to sell. He will want written orders then.
I've left this towards the end deliberately, but the other issue that hovers on the horizon is the government's legislative agenda, and in particular GST. With the Arunachal political crisis on the horizon, with what's happened in Hyderabad and now in JNU, do you believe GST will pass in this session?
I don't think the Congress party is linking the GST to any other political issue. The GST is stuck because the government is stubborn. We have flagged 3 flaws in the bill. And I agree with the finance minister when he says it's better not to pass a bill than a flawed bill. And I'm pointing out his bill is flawed. We have pointed out 3 flaws, let them correct it. The chief economic advisor has virtually, I'm not saying exactly, virtually endorsed the correctness of our objections, and they can pass it easily.
Now, let me have some clarification here. You've identified as a party, and you've done it yourself in your columns as an individual, the 3 problems that you see. Mr. Jaitley says that he's replied to your leaders. Anand Sharma says he's got no reply from Mr. Jaitley. They're still awaiting it. What is the situation? Have they replied? Have they not replied? Or is it that they've replied at the wrong level to the wrong person?
No. As far as I know, and what Mr. Anand Sharma told me is, we have not received any draft amendment to the bill that is pending in Parliament. See, the 3 objections that we have raised requires amendment to the pending bill. So they'll have to tell us whether they are accepting our objection and amending the bill, or not accepting our objection and therefore refusing to amend the bill.
And in the absence of draft amendments to their bill, you deem that they haven't replied because all you've got is verbal conversations, not a meaningful reply.
Yeah, we need to see the amendment, isn't it? Whether the amendment incorporates our objection.
How strongly does Congress insist, and I suppose, I mean, how strongly do you, because you're advising Congress on this issue, insist?
Well, I'm not advising Congress. I give my view.
And they listen to you.
Well, the Congress party may listen to me.
How strongly do you insist that the GST cap has to be written into the Constitution, or would it suffice to write it into the GST bill instead?
No. I think we're very strongly of the view that it must be, and I'll tell you why.
It must be, you didn't finish, it must be in the Constitution?
It must be in the Constitution bill, and I'll tell you why. The GST is an indirect tax. It is a regressive tax. a regressive tax is better be capped. Otherwise, the temptation will be creeping rise of the tax. Therefore, since the GST falls on the poor and the rich, it is a regressive tax. It is India's single most transformative tax reform. It is much better that we cap it now rather than allow a reckless government tomorrow to raise the rates.
But you're saying cap it in the Constitution.
Yeah, that is the only way. The Constitution can be amended. So a reckless government with a two-third majority can still amend it. But at least there will be a restraint against taking the easy way out of increasing the tax.
I'll tell you why I asked, because in a comment that you made, maybe to the full interview to PTI on the 20th of December, you clearly said that if they're not going to cap it in the Constitution, they can at least cap it in the GST bill. Now you're saying it has to be the Constitution.
No, what I said was, if there is a problem about how to draft it, you can achieve the same result by skillful drafting. It can be done. But if they have not asked us how to do it.
You also pointed out that capping it in the Constitution would not be unique, as Arun Jaitley claims, because it's happened in other instances as well. Professional taxes, you've so quoted.
One is professional tax, one is Mr. Jaitley's own bill. He puts a 1% rate in that very Constitution Amendment bill. So if you can put a 1% rate in the Constitution Amendment bill, one part of it, why can't you put an 18% rate in another part of the bill?
And if Mr. Jaitley doesn't agree to capping it in the Constitution, which you're absolutely insisting on, then in fact Congress will not support GST.
That I cannot answer. That the party's parliamentary leadership has to answer.
But what's your hunch?
I don't know.
Let me now come briefly to Mr. Jaitley himself. He is not just your successor as finance minister, he's also the man responsible in the first instance for guiding the Indian economy, for both tackling the problems it faces, which we've discussed, and also giving it a direction for the future. How would you assess his performance over the last 20 months?
Well, I don't believe, I'm not a rating agency.
No, I'm not asking you to rate. I'm asking you to verbally assess.
All I'm saying is that we gave them the first 6 months to settle down, announce their overarching vision, policies and programs. Now we've had a full year following a full budget presented last year. So at the end of 12 months, I ask myself, who is happier today than what he was 12 months ago? Is a farmer happier? Is a business person happier? Is a student happier? Is the Muslim happier? Is the Dalit happier? I can't think of any segment of the population which is happier today and says, my economic situation is better today than what it was 12 months ago. And the indicators, we had discussed it earlier in the interview, all the indicators are very poor, except that one number of GDP. Every other indicator doesn't support the claim that the economy has been well managed. So I would say, they are still in their second year, I would say they have muddled through 2015-16 and they will end 2015-16 leaving everybody disappointed.
You're also saying that had he handled the economy differently, things could have been very different and much brighter today.
I think there were other things that the government could have done, especially a government with 282 on its own and 335 with its allies could have been more sure-footed and could have taken bolder measures.
You frequently pointed out that had you had 282, you'd have immediately scrapped the Vodafone
and many other
taxation.
Things, and many other things.
Very quickly, what are the other things?
I would have passed the direct taxes code. I would have implemented the legislative agenda of the FSLRC, Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission. These are major transformative changes. I would have completely revamped the regulatory regime in the financial sector. SEBI, PFRDA, RBI, the whole regulatory regime could have been revamped, IRDA.
So he had an opportunity to do a lot.
He still has.
Yes, but he could have done it in 20 months, and so far he's squandered the opportunity. You hope he won't squander it further.
I would sincerely hope that he uses this once in 30-year opportunity that a government has a majority to push through major reforms in the financial sector.
And that is really going to be the test of whether this government succeeds or fails.
Well, ultimately, people will ask, what did you achieve?
And at the moment, your answer is, Not very much.
Because they overpromised and they have under-delivered.
Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, Mr. Chidambaram, I want to change and talk to you about the political situation facing the country. We'll be back in a moment's time. Stick with us for part 2. Welcome back. You're watching To The Point and an exclusive interview with former Finance and Home Minister P Chidambaram, whose book, and here it is, Standing Guard, A Year in Opposition, which is a collection of his articles for the Indian Express, is published tomorrow. In a very real sense, Mr. Chidambaram, one of the things that your book does with this collection of your articles is to collectively raise the question, how has the Modi government performed? Has it lived up to its promises, or has it let people down? Let me ask you that as the first question. As you look back on 21 months of the Modi government, how do you view the government's performance?
See, they've allowed the narrative to be hijacked by irresponsible elements. They came to office on the promise of development, jobs, growth, better infrastructure, better services. Today, the narrative has been changed. The narrative is no longer development, it is polarization and intolerance. The narrative is no longer cooperation, it is confrontation. A government that allows the narrative to be changed in a matter of 15 or 16 months, I can only say how sad I am that they've allowed this to happen.
Did they lose track of the narrative, or was it always their intention to switch from what they were saying when they were campaigning and come up with a new narrative when they came to power? I'm asking for your interpretation of that.
Well, if I agree with the second choice that you give me, then I would have to accuse them of a very sinister motive. I wouldn't go that far at the moment. I would say that their management skills are very poor. As a leader of the government and as the virtual leader of the party, it was Mr. Modi's responsibility to rein in the irresponsible elements. Many of them were his fellow pracharaks in the past, but he's Prime Minister of India today, and he should have put his fellow pracharaks of the past in place. He should have reined in his MPs, his MLAs, his ministers, and he should have said, I will not tolerate the hijacking of the narrative on which we came to office.
People tend to talk of him as a strong, decisive Prime Minister who dominates his party. When you say that he's been silent, he's allowed his MPs and pracharaks to hijack the narrative at his developmental plan's cost, how do you then view his leadership?
Well, I don't know. I wrote a column saying, searching for a method in the madness. I've never understood why they would do many of these things.
And you can't find that method?
I can't. Why would they allow a governor to destabilize a government? Why would they allow governors to make irresponsible statements on political issues? Why would they raise issues like who wears what, who eats what, who loves whom, who you should marry? Why should they raise these issues? None of these issues, mind you, figured during the election campaign. So I'm looking for a method in the madness. I can't find one.
Can I ask this? Do you get the feeling that Mr. Modi is not quite in control of what's happening and doesn't know how to ensure that there is comprehensive direction from his side? Or is he perhaps doing this deliberately because he sees some benefit? Which is your interpretation again?
You see, I can't speak for every one of their actions or wrong actions, but Hyderabad and the JNU, it seems to me that they have concluded that they have an opportunity to polarize Indian society.
It's deliberate.
I think it is more or less deliberate. Especially the JNU is more or less deliberate.
Let's come to JNU because it's one of the recent developments that has disturbed the country. You've been Home Minister, you've had to in your time handle sensitive issues. If slogans like Bharat ki barbadi tak, Kashmir ki azadi tak, jang karenge, or Bharat tere tukde honge, inshallah, inshallah, had been publicly said in your time, how would you have responded?
It is unacceptable, but I would have ignored it. If it persisted for a couple of days, I would have found a way to go to JNU and talk to the boys and girls.
Personally?
Yes.
But you would have ignored it, but you would have been critical of it, and you'd have personally gone to talk to them, but you wouldn't
if it had persisted for...
But you wouldn't have taken penal action, leave aside, accuse them of sedition.
There is no question of sedition. Free speech is not sedition. Speech is free, period. It is unacceptable. It may be punishable under some other law. We don't know. We have to look at the exact words and the context and the time and place. But I'm absolutely certain in my mind, and every senior lawyer whom I've spoken to is clear in his mind, that this is not sedition as interpreted by the Supreme Court.
But the important thing is, if you had been Home Minister, you might have gone to personally talk to them if it had persisted, but your first instinct was to ignore it.
Yes.
Because students will be students, and it's perfectly understandable when students say this.
See, similar slogans are raised in the Kashmir Valley day in and day out. Khalistan Zindabad slogan is raised in Punjab every other day. There were guys in Tamil Nadu raising a toast to the killers of Rajiv Gandhi. None of that is acceptable, but none of that amounts to sedition.
Also, wisdom and discretion demands that at least in the initial instance you ignore it. What about slogans considering Afzal Guru a martyr? What about slogans that criticize the Supreme Court for a judicial killing rather than a legitimate hanging? What about comments that suggest that the Supreme Court simply got it wrong, whether it's Afzal Guru or Yaqub Memon or maybe earlier Maqbool Bhat? How would you handle those?
See, a judgment of the Supreme Court is delivered after hearing weighty arguments on both sides. The judges have come to a conclusion. We are bound by that conclusion, but we are not bound to accept the correctness of the conclusion. If there are some people who believe and hold an honest opinion that that conclusion is wrong, they are entitled to hold that opinion.
It's not anti-national to say the Supreme Court got it wrong.
All over the world in democratic countries, Supreme Court judgments are criticized. Obamacare was upheld by the US Supreme Court. The entire Republican Party came down like a ton of bricks on the Supreme Court. The point is, it is not anti-national, it is not sedition to criticize the Supreme Court. I can turn around and say, your criticism is wrong. The judgment, if you say the judgment is wrong, I can turn around and say, sorry, in my view the judgment is right, your criticism is wrong. If they say the judges were muddle-headed, I can say you are even more muddle-headed. But that is not sedition.
What about posters in JNU that proclaim Afzal Guru to be a martyr?
Well, I don't think Afzal Guru was a martyr. Afzal Guru had a fair trial in accordance with the law established in India. At the end of the trial, the court found him guilty and gave him the extreme punishment. I don't think such a person can be called a martyr.
Today, what you said to me just now about these slogans, about Afzal Guru, about criticizing the Supreme Court, are also comments that you made in the morning to the Economic Times, and elements of the BJP has criticized you for this. You're, in a sense, being attacked on the grounds that you're also being anti-national. How do you respond to your critics in the BJP?
I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago. We are all anti-nationals in that sense. If you go by the BJP standard, we are all anti-nationals. What did I say this morning? I said, it is possible to hold an honest opinion that the Afzal Guru case was wrongly decided. There are some people who hold that opinion. If they hold it honestly, they're entitled to that opinion. I may accept it, I may not accept it, but it is an honest opinion held by fellow citizens.
In fact, it's not even criminal if they hold it dishonestly. They're entitled to an opinion.
Well, if they hold it dishonestly, I would accuse them of dishonesty. But if they hold it honestly, I cannot accuse them of sedition.
Let me come to a second issue in recent weeks that has troubled the country. It's the political crisis in Arunachal Pradesh. Your party, understandably, is aggrieved by the way your government has been toppled. But you did the same thing in 1984 to Farooq Abdullah when he was removed. At midnight, you did it a few months later to NTR. Do you feel that there's a sense...
In retrospect, I think those were wrong decisions. But those who were in office at that time, those who took the decision at that time, must explain or justify those decisions. I'm not saying Congress Party, when in office, never took a wrong decision. Obviously, we have taken wrong decisions. But one wrong decision of the past does not justify a wrong decision today. Since then, we've had the Bombay judgment, we've got the Bihar judgment, and therefore the law has been more clearly stated now. And that is why you don't find too many wrong decisions. Arunachal, in my view, was hopelessly wrong. It is clearly an adventure.
Possibly Bihar 2005 as well, taken by your government.
Possibly. But I think we pulled back from the brink there. In Arunachal, the government...
The Supreme Court pushed you back from the brink.
No. Well, if somebody pushes you from the brink or you pull back from the brink. In Arunachal, the governor was an adventurist. He was doing an operation sabotage there.
The problem is that you raised this matter with the Supreme Court. The initial comments from the judges clearly suggested they were disturbed by what was happening, but then the Supreme Court has allowed a new government to be sworn in.
Well, I'm not part of that case, so I really don't know what happened in court.
No, but I'm asking a different question.
Yes.
I'm saying, as a former Home Minister and as one of the country's leading lawyers, are you disappointed by the way the Supreme Court has handled the matter?
No. You can't reach any conclusion based on oral observations during the course of an argument. That is part of the discussion.
Okay.
That is not an order. That is not a judgment. One has to wait for the judgment and then take a view on the judgment.
Let me come to something else. We're running out of time. Many people say that despite the mistakes the Modi government has either made or inflicted on itself, it gets away with them because Congress as an opposition is not just weak, it's unimpressive. How do you defend the Congress party?
Congress's numbers are weak in the Lok Sabha, which is why our impact in the Lok Sabha is not as strong as our impact in the Rajya Sabha. We have only 44. If we had, say, 94 or 124, the impact would be much greater. It is the numbers which make us appear weak. But clearly, the Congress party is more visible, the Congress party is more voluble now, and the Congress party's leadership is throwing itself into the middle of every issue and taking a stand.
But is it because people continually raise questions about Rahul Gandhi? They say he is not a natural-born politician. His interventions in Parliament are unimpressive. His speeches are sometimes considered just boring. He's failed to impress the media. Public opinion still raises questions about him. They don't think he's cut out to be Prime Minister.
Well, I think these are opinions, and I think opinion is free in this country.
But does it worry you that the man who is seen to be the next Congress Prime Minister, were you in a position to have one, doesn't carry credibility?
No, I don't agree. I think he's more visible now, and he has got rid of the criticism that he was not visible and not present. He speaks more. He's got rid of the criticism that he doesn't speak on many subjects. So when he's visible and speaks more, I think that is a welcome makeover of his persona.
You know, people say it as a joke, but actually behind the joke there lies a certain factualness. People say if a man can't decide at the age of 45, and bear in mind, at 45 he's not a young child any longer, he's in middle age, whether he wants to shave or be or bearded, how can he decide the bigger questions about ruling India?
This is facetious. This is a flippant question. There are many young people...
But it's a question many Indians ask and they joke about it, and many a truth is spoken in jest, as you know.
Many young Indians grow beard these days. Many young Indians...
But they don't shave every week. They don't shave the beard every week and then grow it the next week and then shave it this week and then grow it again.
These are completely irrelevant. Obama appears without a tie. Obama wears a combat jacket. I think these are completely irrelevant. I think shaving or not shaving or wearing a kurta or wearing jeans are not relevant. What is relevant is, are you there? Are you engaged? Are you involved in the seminal issues of the day? And are you articulating your party's position clearly and cogently?
And he does all of that for you?
I think he's doing more and more of it now than what he used to do a year ago. A year ago, he was being criticized for not doing it, and now you're criticizing him for doing it.
Is he better than his mother as leader of the party?
These are not comparisons. They belong to two different generations. Are you better than your father? Is my son better than I? I mean, these are not questions which are relevant. Each one belongs to a generation, and each one reacts according to his or her age and time.
All right, Mr. Chidambaram, let's leave it there. A pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.